So she did struggle with language proficiency. Um, so then, originally, my dad told me that as a young man, when he first was thinking about joining New Tribes Mission, he wanted to go to Brazil. My mother said that she originally wanted to go to the Philippines, and they got assigned to Senegal, West Africa. So I was about a year old, ish, plus or minus, maybe a month or two. I was about a year old when we took our very first flight to Senegal, West Africa. And my mother said that I cried the entire flight. And back then it was about 8 hours. It was about an 8-hour flight. Because you would fly from JFK in New York City. You'd fly from JFK to Paris, France. And then from Paris, France, you would fly to Dakar, the capital city of Senegal. The first 18 months or so in Senegal, they spent in trying to Bignona. It was Bignona was the name of the town. Not a small town, not big, not big like the capital city, but not small either. So they spent the first 18 months or so in Bignona learning French. And that was the whole point. The whole point was to learn the national language, because Senegal is part of French West Africa. And French West Africa, all the countries got their independence from France at the same time. And the deal was, what France told them was, you all do it or nobody gets it. It's an all or nothing deal. And then on top of it being an all or nothing deal, they had to meet certain criteria. For instance, French was going to be their national language, et cetera, et cetera. There was a whole list of things. So Senegal as a country has, I don't know what the number is, but I would guess somewhere like 100 native language groups. That's, again, just a guess, but it's got to be a lot. But French is the national language. So of all the groups, up in the north, the Pools are predominant, and they extend up into Mauritania and northern Africa. They come as far south as northern Senegal. The Wolof are a pretty prominent group, very prominent language group. And there are others. Those are the two that I was most familiar with, because people from those particular tribes were usually the ones who drove the national taxis. So I'll throw a picture in at some point, but the taxis, the big bus, like, they're not a bus like you would think in the United States, but holds maybe 10 or 15 people, and they'd pack like 30 into it. And it, they would go from the Dakar all the way out into the bush to the furthest reaches of the empire. Of course, I'm being obtuse, but that was how if you wanted to travel in the country, you had to get out to a road where these taxis would be going back and forth from the far reaches of the bush out, into the cities, and you had to pay for passage, and you could cram into it and throw your stuff up on top, and you could get wherever you wanted to go if you had the money and you were willing to cram in like a sardine. Um, so usually the drivers were Wolof primarily, and there were a lot of Wolof people in Kadagu. Kadagu was the I guess you could say like the county seat. If we were to compare to the United States, Dakar was the capital city, and then if you got out into the bush, Tambacounda was like, let's say, like kind of like the state capital of the frontier. The state we lived in was called the Frontier, and then if you went further out into the bush away from Tambacounda was a pretty decent sized town. They had a decent market. They had restaurants. They had hotels with pools. One hotel with a pool, etc. It was a place. It wasn't great, but it was a decent sized town. And then you go even further out into the bush. The last place that had an airport was Kadagu, and that was kind of like I said, you could consider that like the county seat. And they had a market, so if you needed supplies, you could go into Kadagu, and you could go to the market and buy food and whatever you needed. There was a pharmacy there, not very well stocked, but there was a pharmacy. There was a clinic that had one or two doctors that worked in it. My dad, if it was an absolute emergency, he might have maybe taken us there. Maybe. If it was like life-saving necessity. But even though the doctors were real, the doctors were real, legitimate doctors, but because there were certain expectations of the people for what the doctor was supposed to do, they did engage in some witchcraft stuff in order to convince the people that the doctoring they were doing was legitimate. So, for instance, here's an example. Let's say someone comes in with a snake bite. They would treat the person for the snake bite, but in order to convince them that they had actually treated the snake bite, one of the things they would do is they would shave their fingernails, and they would take those small fingernail shavings and they would hide them and then pretend to pull them out of the snake bite and say, "Oh, see, I found the fangs. It's, you're going to be okay. The fangs are out." So, again, they were legitimate doctors. I don't know how good they were. My dad could comment on that. But they were legitimate doctors, but they had to engage in some of these things in order to convince the people that the medicine that they were applying, that the medical practice they were applying, was real. Okay, so my parents spent about 18 months learning French. After they finished learning French, they were then assigned to the Malinke people, way out in the middle of nowhere, out on the frontier. So again, Tambacounda was our state capital, and Kadagu was our county seat. And if you got really far out so the village we ended up in was called Bajula. Bajula is generally not on Google Maps. You can find it if you know where it is. You can. I have it marked on my Google Maps. But you can find Bamboo, and you can find Saraya. Saraya was a teeny tiny little town. I would say maybe an overgrown village is fair. Call it an overgrown village. They didn't really have a market. They didn't have a market. Kadagu had a market, but Saraya did not have a market. They did, however, have a general store. So if you were desperate for something, like flour or rice or just some oil, sugar, salt. If you were desperate for candy, like they had a general store where you could get some stuff. Not much, but you could get some stuff. And they did. I don't believe they had an airport in Saraya, by airport I mean airstrip. So I'm using that term loosely. The missionaries built airstrips at everywhere being in Bajula, we would just drive into Kadagu. It was like a 2-hour drive before the road was paved. When the road was bad, it was a 2-hour drive to get into Kadagu, and we would go to that airport. We would. But if you were all the way out in Medina Bafe was way down near the border with Guinea. Those missionaries actually built their own airstrip out there so that the Cessna could come in and bring them supplies and stuff like that. That's how far out. Like, they were really far out. From where we were in Bajula, it was at least another 2, maybe 3 hours drive to get out to Medina Bafe. Even later on, when the Italian government came through and paved the road for us, they stopped at Saraya. They didn't go any further out into the bush. So if there was a hard pack road after Saraya, so the pavement ended at Saraya, and then there was a hard pack road out another 10 miles or so away, further into the bush, and then it was just ruts. Like, it was a jeep trail after that to get out there to Medina Bafe. So, if you wanted to go out to Medina Bafe, even after the road was paved, for us, having the paved road meant instead of a 2-hour, maybe 2.5-hour drive into town, it was 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so. It was 60 kilometers for us. Of course, the 60 kilometers didn't change with the road being paved, but having a paved road instead of a jeep trail, with water holes in the middle of it that you would have to ford, made things a lot faster and easier to get to town. The folks out in Medina, they did not have that. Luxury. And I have a picture of my dad and Dick Day carrying a motorcycle across the river because we were headed out to Medina to do something. I don't know if we were just going out to visit the missionaries there or what we were doing, but if you wanted to get across the river, you had to either ford it or something, and we had Land Rover, but I think on many occasions we actually would leave the Land Rover parked on that side of the river and go across the footbridge, the bamboo footbridge that crossed the river, and walk the rest of the way, as I recall. Thankfully, it wasn't much further after that. Now, during the dry season, when the river was dry, no big deal. But, when the river wasn't dry, you had to figure it out. And in many cases, the only way in and out of Medina was by that airstrip that the missionaries had built.